So I'm going to be taking a quick break from my randomized cast series since the All-Stars video is going to take a bit to set up, although I have made some decent progress thus far. Today's video, however, is going to be a what-if style video, which is much more common among similar content output. In this case, it's going to be what if Ezekiel and Staci switched seasons, and we'll be going over how both Island and Revenge would play out with this swap. I thought this would be interesting since for this sub-series I want to find concepts that are relatively new, and I thought it would be fun to explore two separate seasons for a change instead of just one overarching series. Also, just to be clear, I'm not going to go as much into detail here as I do for my other Total Drama videos, since instead of a full rewrite, there's only one change that causes a singular butterfly effect, while the rest of the series would play out relatively the same as in canon. However, that still leaves me with a surprisingly decent amount to cover. So with that, let's start with Season 1. Everyone's intro is the same, and Staci's would still be the same as it is in Revenge, only instead of Anne Maria shutting her up, it'd be Heather instead, and she'd buddy up with Katie and Sadie since all three of them yap a lot. Staci jumps and continues hanging out with Katie and Sadie. Courtney still refuses to jump and gets voted out since Ezekiel isn't here to make his sexist comment, and Staci's yapping doesn't irk the team enough to vote her out over Courtney, especially considering Katie and Sadie are already on her side. And Courtney also yaps a lot this episode, and with her failing to do the challenge as an add-on for her lack of utility, the team still votes Courtney out. This episode plays out basically exactly the same. Gwen still wins the challenge for her team, Heather still steals Eva's MP3 player, she goes apeshit, and she still gets booted for it. Again, this is pretty much exactly the same as the original. Staci's not going to make a difference here. Duncan and Harold still win it for their team, and Noah gets voted out for being a smartass. Again, same deal as before. Harold beatboxes and Justin gets screwed over by Heather. Okay, now we actually get to some changes here. Because Staci is with Katie and Sadie, the three of them now all get lost together, with Staci desperately trying to stop the other two from fighting with each other, but can't seem to get through to either of them. The Gophers still win since the Bass are missing Katie, Sadie, and now Staci as well, but when they go to vote, there's a three-way tie between the three lost girls, with each of them getting 2 from the other 6 team members. So like you have these 2 voting for Katie, these 2 voting for Sadie, and these 2 voting for Staci. But the thing is, even though these 3 all get 2 votes, Katie, Sadie, and Staci all vote together, and even though they probably like Duncan less, I think they would all choose to get rid of Tyler. Since despite the fact that none of them are the smartest, I imagine they would probably still recognize that Duncan is too useful to dump this early, and just in case they end up in a tiebreaker, it's probably better to vote someone out that's more useless and less likely to win a tiebreaker. I was gonna say Staci's fear would be to stop talking, but instead I decided she'd share Lindsay, Sadie, and Katie's fear, which is bad haircuts. Anyway, Duncan still wins the 3-pointer for his team since even though Courtney isn't here to encourage him, it is a piece of cardboard at the end of the day, and he still has other people to encourage him here like DJ or Bridget or Jeff. And also the 3-person Yap Alliance might concern him a bit, so he would want to stay on the safe side and just do the fear. So now the Gophers lose, and I think Heather can pull her alliance together with Beth and Lindsay, and then bribe Owen with food again to get 4 votes in her corner. And then beyond that, she would convince Lashana and Izzy to both vote for Cody, alongside them for failing his fear spectacularly and generally just not being very useful. And considering the team voted Cody out for that exact reason, literally 2 episodes later in the original without Heather's influence, I see no reason why they wouldn't do so here. Even though Cody isn't injured, he would be covered in gross garbage from the time bomb, and Heather wasn't nearly as mean in this episode as she was in the Deer Hunter one. So that also keeps heat off her back and therefore puts more onto Cody's for this vote. Not much to say here, this one's basically the same. Izzy still gets chased down by the RNCP and leaves. So all the original hunters are still here, and Heather still gets targeted for her bitchiness, and without Cody to be her human shield, Heather can't save herself anymore, since at best she can persuade Lindsay and maybe Owen to vote for Beth, but the other 4 are definitely voting for her no matter what. There's no getting around that. Because Heather isn't here, Beth's Moai statue never gets revealed, and Owen still eats all the food, so his team still loses, and now he gets voted out. Because the teams are so different now, I had to pull out the random number generator to decide what the pairs would be, besides the one that are still here, which are Trent and Lindsay versus Duncan and DJ, and then Bridget and Jeff. So first I got Gwen and Lashana versus Harold and Staci. The Gophers win this round because Gwen beat DJ at climbing even with Heather humiliating her, and now Heather isn't here to do that, and Harold and Staci are both worse climbers than DJ, so they definitely lose to Gwen. Then we have Trent and Lindsay versus Bridget and Jeff. Trent and Lindsay still lose for the same reasons as in the original. And then I have Beth and Gwen versus Duncan and DJ. So at this point, the score would be 1-1, so this round determined who wins the challenge. but Beth still has the Moai statue, not knowing it's cursed, and she would have enough false determination to showcase it without Heather being there to weigh her down, and also just generally being more confident in herself. Which of course means she loses, and because she held onto the statue, she's voted out 3-2, with everyone besides herself and Lindsay voting for Beth. Gwen still wins the challenge for the Gophers, and as much as Harold and Duncan don't like each other, I think the Yap trio probably starts to get on everyone's nerves, and DJ and Jeff are already friends with Duncan, and I think Bridget would rather side with Jeff and his friends over the Yap trio, but Bridget wouldn't love the idea of allying with Duncan since she thinks his bullying of Harold and personality are too aggressive and mean. So to bridge the gap, Duncan reluctantly allows Harold to decide who the 5 of them are going to vote off. And I think Harold actually decides to vote for Staci, since her constant stories about her family members almost seems like she's trying to one-up Harold's far more interesting knowledge about niche facts and statistics, so Staci is voted out 5-3. Jeff thanks Duncan for what he did to appease Bridget, but Duncan grabs Jeff by the collar and coldly says, "You owe me one." DJ still beats Trent for round 1, Lashana still beats Jeff in round 2, and Harold would now see Lindsay's boobs instead of Heather's, causing him to wipe out in the same way, which is pretty embarrassing, so his team still votes him out unanimously. Without Heather here to cause turmoil on the team and Owen not here to eat as much as he does, the girls win the cruise this time since they still have Lashana, and I don't think anyone else can beat her in the tiebreaker, assuming the guys even get that far in the challenge, which causes Duncan to cash in his favor with Jeff and start the guys' alliance a few episodes early. So now we're at the merge, and Eva and Izzy still return. Now, despite Duncan just making the guys' alliance, I don't think it really matters for this challenge. None of them are going to be able to outlast Eva or Lashana, and Lashana still wins immunity, so everyone still votes out Eva again for the same reason. Now, Heather isn't here to kiss Trent to turn him and Gwen against each other, and Duncan gets immunity because he's the one closest to taking the role of villain and therefore obtains this episode's plot armor. Now, this vote is all over the place. Lindsay, Katie, and Sadie all vote for Izzy, cause she scares them, while Gwen and Lashana are both tired of Katie and Sadie, and Duncan is going to choose to target someone he considers a big target. Trent would be cool with the bros, so he asks Duncan if he could ask Gwen to join in to make them a 5-person vote, and normally Duncan wouldn't trust something like that, but because he's cool with Gwen, he'd give Trent the thumbs up. And Gwen and Lashana are friends, so Gwen wouldn't want to vote for her, so Gwen and the guys settle on Izzy, who's generally agreed upon to be the next biggest threat, meaning that she gets the vast majority of the votes here. So everyone who's here was still here originally except for Trent, Katie, and Sadie, and there's no way any one of those 3 are going to find a better hiding spot than Lashana. So she's still the only one who hides from Chef successfully and gains immunity that way. However, because the Heather kiss never happened and Trent and Gwen would still be smooth sailing relationship-wise, they'd still both be too distracted by each other to hide effectively, meaning Chef finds them first. But luckily for them, Katie and Sadie both hide behind trees out in the open in really bad hiding spots, so both of them gain immunity by turning them both into Chef. Duncan would still want to target Bridget this vote, and because Jeff owes Duncan that favor from earlier, it would be clear that he'd actually vote Bridget this time with the other guys, rather than it being ambiguous like it was in canon, but Trent would have accidentally given Gwen one too many hints about the guys' alliance due to his infatuation with her. Fortunately, Gwen and Trent's relationship is still healthy, so she agrees to keep this secret as long as she's in and has a say. And though mildly frustrated, Duncan would accept this, since again, he's cool with Gwen, as long as she agrees to vote Bridget with them this episode. And even though Gwen likes Bridget well enough, she'd still go along with this to keep herself and Lashana safe, who she likes a lot more. So, Bridget still gets booted with 6 votes to Duncan's 4. I don't know who gets whose bike, and I really don't feel like trying to figure that out since that process is very complicated. But Duncan and Lindsay still make it to the sudden death round, and instead of Owen and Heather joining them, it'd be Trent and Katie. Trent because he's good at building bikes, and Katie because she's been shown to be nimble and athletic enough in the dodgeball competition to get through the obstacles for the first round, I think. Lashana wouldn't be riding with Izzy the entire time, but I still think she'd probably wouldn't get past the first round because even though she's very strong, I don't think she would be agile enough or used to bikes enough to evade all the obstacles. So yeah, it's these 4. I'm pretty sure Lindsay is the only one who could possibly cross the finish line in the second round though, since she was really good at it and no one else would be able to dodge everything here. So this means there's a 3-way tie between Duncan, Trent, and Katie since they'd all wipe out and none of them would cross the finish line. So they now all have to do one last race to break the tie. And I literally have no idea who'd get last, but if I had to guess, I would probably say Katie simply for having the least bike racing experience out of the 3. Sadie would be too sad to scream with Katie gone, and Gwen and Trent take Owen and Izzy's place in the woods, so Gwen isn't there to stop the real chainsaw killer with a hook now. although Duncan still stops the fake chef version. Since this is an auto-elimination, I think Chris would call it a tie between DJ and Lindsay for who performed the worst as a theoretical horror movie character, since DJ still screams like he did in the original, and I think Lindsay would probably have an equally embarrassing showing. So now, Lindsay and DJ are the only ones people are able to vote for. This is tough since both of them are really well liked, but because the Guys Alliance would still be intact with the possible exception of Jeff after Bridget, Duncan still has these 4 votes to protect DJ and vote Lindsay with. And even outside of Duncan, I doubt Jeff would pick Lindsay to keep over DJ since DJ and him are good friends regardless of Duncan's negative influence. And obviously DJ and Lindsay are voting for each other, so in a 6-2 vote, Lindsay is eliminated. DJ easily gets the free dinner because he's great with animals, but no one gets immunity, so the vote is a free-for-all. At this point, Lashana would be savvy enough to figure out what's going on with the Guys Alliance, and wouldn't be too mad at Gwen for not telling her since, it's part of the game. But now that she knows, she'd insist on budging in and voting for Sadie. And not only would Gwen and Trent vote with Lashana, even if Duncan refuses, but I think Lashana could just straight up intimidate Duncan into voting with her against Sadie. So Sadie gets voted out 5-2. I kept the first 2 pairs the same, so Duncan and Lashana are still a pair and Gwen and Jeff are still a pair, meaning that Trent and DJ now replace Heather and Owen. And because of that, I think Duncan and Lashana win immunity, since they'd still win the 3rd round and would now also win the 1st round, since Duncan has been shown to be really good at eating challenges, and Owen's not here to outpace him in that regard anymore. So now that it's down to the wire and being protected by immunity, I think Duncan starts to play a little dirty, insisting it has to be done, and gets everyone to separate Gwen and Trent since there aren't really many other options anyway, and originally the worry that the finale would be a popularity contest would still be present, and now create a target on Gwen and Trent's relationship instead of Jeff. And between the 2 of them, I think Trent gets eliminated since he seems more likely to win a popular vote than Gwen. We don't talk about this one. Jeff finds Mr. Coconut instead of Owen, everything else is basically the same. So the teams would now be Duncan and Gwen versus Jeff and DJ, decided by a random number generator, and Gwen and Duncan obviously win, having a much better sense of direction collectively, better survival skills, generally just being smarter, and both of them can also easily take advantage of DJ and Jeff's kindness and steal their stuff in the woods afterwards. So now Chef decides between DJ and Jeff for who to eliminate. And we know Chef sees a piece of his former self in DJ, so he's obviously going to keep him in over Jeff. Now, unlike in the original, I don't really think Gwen would double team with anyone since she likes DJ and Duncan well enough, and she's probably more resilient than either of them on her own regardless. So it's between Duncan and DJ for who gets the other spot in the finale. And ordinarily, I'd say Duncan takes it easily, but DJ has never been this close to the end, and with Chef now encouraging him, I think he'd reach something primal inside of him, kind of like with when he was a deer and pushed Owen off the cliff, and managed to narrowly edge out Duncan in terms of resilience. Finale doesn't change too much aside from DJ taking Owen's spot. I think everyone who supported Gwen still supports her now, and everyone who didn't roots for DJ, who would still want to throw a party if he wins, but would also want to give the majority of his winnings to animal charities and maybe also his mom's business startup or something. Again, the challenge plays out mostly the same until the end. Instead of brownies being the determining factor, it just depends on when DJ's mom shows up. If it's before Gwen crosses the finish line, DJ wins, and if it's after she crosses, Gwen wins. Both Gwen and DJ would choose not to sacrifice the $100,000 in the island special, since both of them are more practical and wouldn't want to give up everything they earned after all they went through, meaning this timeline would effectively end here. Ezekiel's intro would be sort of similar to the original, only now with Dawn commenting on his aura and lightning saving him from drowning after the boat explodes. Now, immediately we run into a potential problem since Ezekiel's team has both more people overall and more men than the other, and because they lost to the maggots, this means there's a risk of him saying some interesting things about women. But I still don't think he runs his mouth since his team technically still reached the goal first, and lost due to sheer bad luck more than anything else, so he doesn't make the sexist comment here. So instead, Dakota is eliminated for being the dumbest and most useless member of her team now, since originally she was in the bottom 2 anyway. I don't really see Ezekiel making a difference in either part of this challenge, so the maggots still win, and because Dakota isn't here, Scott convinces his team to vote out Sam instead, since he got brutalized this challenge, and Scott can easily convince Ezekiel and Lightning that he's useless. And Dawn has no reason not to trust him yet, so she'd probably go along with this too. B might not, since Scott made fun of him this episode, but it's still not enough to save him from a 4-vote majority. Everything that happens in episodes 3 through 5 are basically exactly the same, because Ezekiel really wouldn't change much beyond bonding with Scott since they're both farm boys, essentially making Scott's schemes even easier to pull off if anything. And he also has some awkward third wheelie moments between Mike and Zoe. So, Scott still sabotages B, this episode is still relatively the same, and Scott still sabotages Dawn. Oh yeah, and Brick also switched teams in episode 4. The monkey still kidnaps Lindsay in a jetpack, and the rats try and fail to implement their strategy of climbing the mountain on each side. Jo still wins the challenge with her makeover punch combo, so the rats are sent to elimination. I think Scott and Ezekiel both vote Brick, since Scott can easily convince Zeke Brick is up to no good, and Scott wouldn't want a goody two-shoes like Brick on his team since that makes it harder for him to commit nefarious deeds. However, he is unable to convince Lightning or Brick to vote for anyone other than Ezekiel, since they both view him as both useless and also kinda weird and misogynistic. Especially since they would lose to the maggots, I think Ezekiel would now say the thing that is the bad thing. And I think Brick and Lightning would be really turned off by that. So the vote ends in a 2-2 tie between Brick and Ezekiel, and Brick obviously wins just about any tiebreaker, so yeah. Scott and Jo also still switch teams. Since Ezekiel literally just got launched off a catapult and doesn't have the same history as he does in the original up to this point, being cast away and left to rot on the Plane and World Tour, Feral Zeke is no longer a thing. Because Ezekiel isn't feral and isn't here to command the army of mutant gophers to kidnap people, the toxic rats are able to find the Chris statue in the cave first, with less people to worry about and also just having faster players. Plus, Brick would never need to save anyone from Feral Zeke in the first place, so he would no longer sacrifice himself for the other team and would just win the challenge along with his team instead, meaning the maggots are now sent to elimination. Now for the vote, even though Mike and Cameron don't really like Scott, they don't have any real reason to target him over Anne Maria, since Anne Maria has been shown to be a direct threat to Mike and Zoe's relationship, and obviously Mike and Zoe don't like that. And Scott could easily read the room, so he and Cameron would have no reason to not go along with this vote, meaning she gets voted out 4-1. Oh yeah, and also Anne Maria never finds the fake diamond. Because Anne Maria never quit on the winning team, the cast now has one more person than before, meaning Dakota now has no reason to return to the game, or anyone else for that matter. And because of that, the maggots have no way of getting through the giant thorn bush, since Dakota Zoid isn't there. And considering they already lost before, that plus Brick now helping track down where Gwen is buried on his team, plus the fact that Scott is still actively trying to make his team lose, means the maggots definitely lose this challenge. And Mike and Cameron obviously vote for Scott, now fully distrusting him, and Zoe wouldn't be nearly as hostile towards Scott since he was working her this episode, but she still votes for him by default since she's actually close with Mike and Cameron, unlike Scott. However, Scott still has the immunity idol, meaning not only is he safe, but his vote is now the only one that counts. And he wouldn't really perceive any of these three as a threat, but I think he probably votes for Cameron since he wants to keep Zoe on his side, and obviously Zoe would want to keep Mike in over Cameron, so there's that. But because Cameron gets eliminated here, Scott never finds out about Mike's multiple personality disorder. Now we're at the merge. It is literally exactly the same, only with Brick replacing Cameron. Since Scott no longer has blackmail on Mike, he'd be trying to drive a wedge between Brick and Jo instead, which kinda already exists, but hey, Scott doesn't have anything better to do. And with Jo and Lightning still imprisoned by Chef, I think Brick now wins the challenge, since Scott has a sucky car and Mike and Zoe just wouldn't be as fast or determined as Brick here. And because Brick wins, he obviously decides to kick Jo out, with Scott grinning as that's exactly what he wanted. Even though Mike wouldn't trust him, Scott points out to him and Zoe that they have no real reason to be mad at him since he deliberately kept them together when he could have easily chosen not to, which they both agree is true, and that they should focus on taking out Lightning, since he's the biggest threat. Mike now has to build the rocket, and Brick gets the air balloon, with the other three getting the same thing. Since an air balloon is one of the easier things to make here, and Brick probably has some form of aerial-based military experience, he finishes his vehicle first and wins the smoke machine. Brick decides to involve literally everyone in a 5-person plan to surround Heather's blimp, which they all agree to since Heather literally has the money, so at this point everyone really just wants to maximize the odds of stopping her over winning because, the money is the whole point of them being there in the first place. But despite that, Scott still finds an opportunity to shed feathers in Mike's face to trigger Chester, which takes Mike out of commission since Chester wouldn't know what's going on. So being both selfless and strategic, Brick decides to use himself and his smoke machine as bait, and smokes Heather's windows so that Lightning can sneak right by and fight her for the money like in the original. This time, no other vehicle besides Lightning's intercepts the blimp, since they're all coordinated this time, and Lightning wins immunity by being stronger and faster than Heather even after the blimp crashes, and Chris takes the money from Lightning and gives him immunity. I think Zoe would believe Mike that Scott sabotaged him on purpose, but Brick wouldn't, since to him it just looked like he screwed up the plan due to his own lack of merits. Scott could convince Brick to vote Mike along with Lightning for being the soldier out of line to the former and the unneeded screw-up for the latter, meaning that Mike gets voted out 3-2. This episode is literally the same, except Cameron is replaced with Brick. Brick's meal isn't nearly as stomachable as Cameron, so Scott wouldn't even want to try to steal it, meaning everyone throws up, but I do ultimately think Scott still wins the advantage because he could eat his green pie the fastest. Scott still avoids the tracking collar but doesn't avoid Fang. Zoe still goes commando and fights Chef, and Lightning doesn't have Cameron on his back anymore, so he wins immunity again. Scott and Lightning both vote commando Zoe since she scares both of them, and Brick and Zoe vote Scott since Zoe hates Scott's guts, and Brick feels Zoe is a more worthy competitor to go to the finale with, plus he just gets a really skeevy, not good vibe from Scott. So now there's another tiebreaker between Scott and Zoe, and this could go either way, but I'm going to say Zoe wins because Scott would still be super injured from Fang, plus Zoe just showcases more skill in general during this episode. Lightning wouldn't have a vendetta against anyone this time, and because of that, I don't know if anyone would work together, but I'm guessing Zoe and Brick still try to work together to take Lightning out regardless. It plays out basically the same, with Brick getting eaten by Larry and Zoe saving him, giving Lightning the chance to steal the flower and win. Brick would try to sacrifice himself at elimination, but Lightning still insists on booting Zoe instead, since even though Brick is stronger than Cameron, neither are as much of a threat as Commando Zoe, so Lightning still gets rid of her to maximize his chances of winning. Again, the finale doesn't change too much. I think Brick would realize he can't actually go toe-to-toe with Lightning in hand-to-hand combat, so Cameron helps build him an Iron Man suit to give him a chance, and from there everything is basically the same, including both endings only with Brick in Cameron's place, where in Brick's ending he gets to go to fashion school. Yay. So that's the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it. These what ifs are obviously much less in depth than my randomized cast series since, there's only one ripple effect instead of a whole different cast. So I plan on making more of these in the future. The All-Stars video will still come out next at some point, but in the coming months I'm going to have a lot of other film projects on my hands, so I may decide to make more of these what if style videos since they're shorter and easier to make. So feel free to shoot me any ideas you'd want to see. Anyway, yeah, see you for the All-Stars rewrite.